I opened my inbox at 7:12 a.m., still half asleep, and saw a subject line that didn't make sense. Your services are no longer required. That was it. No warning. No meeting. Just a plain text email from HR, and signed, sent at 3:41 a.m., 11 years. Gone in one sentence. I sat there, staring at the screen, waiting for the second email. The explanation. The apology. Something. But nothing came. I was still wearing yesterday's shirt. Coffee from the machine in the kitchen tasted like cardboard. My phone buzzed. A calendar reminder for a meeting I'd scheduled with the merger team that morning. $600 million. That's what the deal was worth. And I was the architect behind it. They fired me the week before the contracts were set to close, as if I hadn't spent 2 years smoothing egos, vetting compliance, protecting both sides from legal exposure. I had the files. All of them. Signed NDAs, conditional equity drafts, internal memos. I was the one who flagged the offshore asset discrepancies their CFO forgot to disclose. I was the one who convinced the other firm's general counsel not to walk. And now I was out. Just like that. My name is Eric Mallory. I'm 43 years old. Or was, on that morning. For over a decade, I worked as the senior risk analyst at Stratwell Capital. I wasn't flashy. I didn't play golf. Never tried to schmooze with the execs. I just kept my head down and made problems disappear before they became headlines. And that made me dangerous. You don't fire someone like me by email at 3:41 a.m. unless you're trying to bury something before sunrise. So I didn't respond. I closed my laptop, took a slow breath, and started packing the essentials, not from my office, but from my home. External hard drives. A printed copy of the merger's risk assessment, including the flag violations. My notebooks. And a red folder labeled Retention. I'd created that folder 3 years ago, the first time I caught wind that something in the C-suite didn't smell right. Quiet threats in quarterly meetings. Missing signatures on compliance reviews. Whispers about back-channel trades. They thought I was a numbers guy. They forgot I was also a soldier, 6 years in logistics, including 3 in counterintelligence. I never forgot how to plan a fallback. By noon, I'd sent nothing. Said nothing. No angry emails. No calls. No legal threats. Silence is louder when they expect noise. By evening, the CFO's assistant texted me. Wrong number, she claimed. Then 5 minutes later, an email came from Stratwell's legal counsel. Please confirm receipt of separation notice. Please return company property. That told me what I needed to know. They weren't just cleaning house. They were trying to close the merger without me, which meant something in that deal was rotten. And they needed me gone before anyone started asking questions. I didn't bite. I made no contact. I let the silence thicken. 3 days later, my phone rang. Blocked number. I didn't answer. Then a voicemail. It was their lead attorney. The same man who once called me our firewall against litigation. He sounded rattled. Eric, we need to talk. Something's come up with the merger. You were right. Please call me. I hit play again. Then once more. I didn't smile. I didn't speak. I just opened the red folder and began to move. The morning after I listened to that voicemail, I drove to a co-working space on the other side of town. Not Starbucks. Not my apartment. Somewhere neutral. Quiet. Off-grid. I paid cash for a week-long pass. No real name, just a temp badge. Set up at a corner desk with my back to the wall. Old habits. They expected a reaction. What they got was silence. The merger clock was ticking. Public announcement in 6 days. Press embargo scheduled. Shareholder briefings. Everything lined up like dominoes. And they thought removing me was the last piece they needed. But they forgot something. I hadn't signed the final risk compliance memo. Without it, the deal couldn't legally close. Not with the disclosures I'd already flagged in the early drafts. They needed my name on that paper. And they knew it. Which meant I had time. Not much, but enough. I powered up the encrypted laptop I used only for off-site projects. From there, I accessed a private cloud drive. Nothing tied to Stratwell. No metadata. No breadcrumbs. Inside were layers of reports. My own analysis. Internal communications. Legal drafts with tracked changes. And then, the file I called Hold Point 17. That was the risk position I'd warned them about 6 months earlier. A set of international accounts tied to the acquiring firm, hidden through a chain of shell companies in Malta and Belize. On paper, everything looked clean. But one layer deeper, the connections started to bleed. If those accounts were discovered post-merger, The SEC would tear Stratwell apart. And I told them that. Documented it. Flagged it. Recommended a freeze until full disclosure. They ignored me. Now they wanted my silence in the form of an unsigned termination, hoping I'd just disappear. Hoping I was too loyal or too broke to fight back. But I wasn't interested in revenge. I was interested in leverage. At 11:38 a.m., I drafted an email, not to Stratwell, not to their attorney, but to a private legal contact I kept for situations just like this. A former DOJ investigator turned corporate advisor. He once told me, "Don't call me unless it's a bomb." Subject line, "It's a bomb." I attached a password-protected folder and added one sentence. "Need to confirm legal exposure before I make a move." His reply came in under an hour. One word. Reviewed. That was all I needed. That afternoon, I requested a copy of my official termination paperwork through Stratwell's HR portal. No reply. I tried again through their automated chatbot. Still nothing. They didn't want a paper trail. Not yet. But I did. So I waited. At 5:22 p.m., I got a second voicemail from the same lawyer. He didn't even try to sound calm this time. Said they'd reconsidered the nature of my departure and were open to alternative terms. Asked me to call back as soon as possible. I didn't. Instead, I updated my notes and tagged the log entry with the phrase, "Phase 1, complete." They still thought I was bluffing, and I was fine with that. Let them underestimate me. It made what came next easier. By day 4, the silence wasn't just mine anymore. They started leaking, not to the press, but internally. Stratwell's execs were scrambling. My phone lit up with messages from old colleagues. Some curious, some nervous. One said the merger team had gone dark. Another said they were told to pull all communications referencing my name. No one could explain why the lead risk officer had vanished from a deal this size. Then came the strange part. A junior analyst from legal, someone I barely knew, forwarded me an email thread accidentally. It was internal, marked confidential. The subject line read, "Eric Mallory's exit, legal risk?" They weren't just worried about the merger anymore. They were worried about what I still had. The CFO, Victor Lang, had signed off on my termination. I knew that. I'd worked under him for 7 years. He was the kind of man who called ethics a PR problem and compliance a speed bump. He had pushed this merger harder than anyone, and I was the only person who hadn't bought into his timeline. I read that email 3 times. They had no idea how much I'd archived. No clue what I'd already duplicated. Because I never kept data on one device. Never stored a single file on any machine I didn't personally encrypt. I learned that the hard way in Iraq, when a drive went missing from a forward outpost. Never again. So when Stratwell's legal counsel said they were open to revisiting the nature of my separation, I knew exactly what they meant. They wanted my silence. And they were getting nervous. At 9 p.m. that night, I uploaded an encrypted archive of every flagged item from the merger file, the shell structures, the valuation anomalies, the buried liability clauses, to a secure vault monitored by a third-party legal escrow firm. The kind of firm that only gets access if I miss 3 check-ins in a row. Just insurance. Then I emailed Victor Lang directly. First time since the day I was let go. Subject line, reconsidering terms. I kept it short. I'll speak with your legal team. But not before I receive, in writing, a complete and unedited copy of my termination record, time-stamped and signed. No redactions. No filters. You have 24 hours. I didn't expect a reply, but I got one 15 minutes later. Agreed. You'll have it by morning. That told me what I needed to know. Victor was sweating. He knew I had something. He just didn't know how deep it ran. But he was about to find out. Because while they'd spent the week trying to replace me, I'd spent it rebuilding the framework from the outside. And every system I ever touched still had my fingerprints on it. The next morning, 7:03 a.m., I received the file. Termination letter, PDF. Signed by Victor Lang. Timestamped. Clean formatting. Too clean. I ran it through a metadata reader. The file had been modified an hour before it was sent. The original version, the one likely auto-generated by HR system, had been overwritten. This version excluded any reason for my departure. No mention of performance, downsizing, or restructuring. Just a single vague sentence. Employment contract concluded effective immediately at the discretion of executive leadership. They were scrubbing history, trying to erase the decision. That confirmed it. They knew they'd made a mistake. And now they were trying to rewrite it, just in case this came back to bite them in court or with regulators. But what they didn't understand is that my silence wasn't indecision. It was strategy. I uploaded the altered file to my legal vault. Then I cross-checked it against internal retention policy docs, ones I had access to during my time managing digital compliance. Stratwell was required to maintain all original HR records in duplicate with secure hash verification, which meant if the original still existed, this new version wouldn't match the checksum. That's tampering. And tampering during a pending M&A deal? That's a federal offense. At 10:20 a.m., I received a call from a new number. No voicemail this time. Just silence on the other end when I picked up. Then a voice. Not Victor. Not legal. It was someone I hadn't heard from in 3 years. Charlotte Hale. External Regulatory Counsel Stratwell, used for high-risk deals. She didn't deal with personnel issues. She handled firestorms. She got straight to it. Said they needed to speak with me immediately. Said the board had been briefed. Said new concerns had arisen with the merger filings and they were requesting my cooperation. That last word, requesting, told me how far things had shifted. 5 days ago, I was disposable. Now they were asking for my cooperation. I didn't answer her directly. I told her I'd consider it. After I received confirmation that Stratwell had notified the SEC about the flagged disclosures I documented 6 months earlier. The line went quiet. Then she said they had not yet made that determination. Of course they hadn't. Because disclosing it would halt the deal. The stock would tank. Shareholders would revolt. And Victor Lang's career would go up in flames. So I let her sit in the silence. After 20 seconds, she asked what I wanted. I said nothing. Because that wasn't the question she should be asking. What I wanted didn't matter. What I had did. I hung up and went back to work. Phase 2. Activated. Let the quiet do the talking. By day 6, the ground under Stratwell was shifting. I hadn't gone public. I hadn't filed a single complaint. But the silence was working. Loudly. One of my old team members sent a message from a personal email. Said the compliance servers were under lockdown. Internal audits had been triggered without notice. IT was instructed to pull archived communication logs for the past year. Nobody knew why, but they all knew when it started, the day I disappeared. Stratwell wasn't preparing for a merger. They were preparing for a storm. I watched it unfold from a distance. No press, no leaks, just quiet movements. Like someone rearranging furniture before the guests arrive, trying to hide the damage. But they couldn't hide from their own systems. Because I'd built them. Every risk flag I ever coded left a trail. Every override had a shadow log. Even when they thought they'd wiped something, there was always residue, timestamps, versions, background syncs they forgot to disable. And I knew where they lived. At 3 p.m., I sent a secure message to my legal contact. Asked him to pull a specific request from Stratwell's SEC pre-merger filings. Buried in Appendix B, Section 7. 4. There was a declaration. All known risks material to the transaction have been disclosed. That one line. It was everything. Because I'd flagged material risk. They'd removed it. And now they were trying to walk a $600 million deal across a legal tightrope, with rotten boards under their feet. At 4:12 p.m., Stratwell's attorney emailed again. Tone, desperate. They wanted a meeting. In person. Said they were exploring options for mutual resolution. Offered to fly me first class to New York. Put me up at the Langford. NDA ready. I didn't reply. Instead, I sent a simple message to Charlotte Hale's direct line. No pleasantries. No threats. SEC Form S-4. Appendix B, Section 7. 4. You might want to confirm if the current version reflects complete disclosure. I didn't even sign it. 5 hours later, a partner at Hale's firm called my attorney. Said there had been an internal oversight, and they were pausing all forward merger actions pending review. That's what panic looks like, wrapped in legalese. That night, I drove to the edge of the city, a place I used to hike when I needed clarity. No reception, just pine and dirt and cold night air. I sat there with a thermos of black coffee and thought about the last 6 days. 11 years at Stratwell, erased in a midnight email. But they didn't understand. They hadn't fired a risk analyst. They'd awakened one. And now, they were living in the system I'd built. The trap wasn't coming. They were already inside it. On day 7, the deal officially stalled. Not announced. Not leaked. But delayed. Quietly. Strategically. like a chess player realizing he was in check, but too proud to say the word. The merger that was supposed to be finalized in 72 hours was now under internal legal review. I didn't need to ask why. My contact at the legal escrow firm forwarded a notification from Hale's office. They'd requested a full chain of custody report for all risk assessments tied to the merger. That meant one thing. The board was waking up. The Real board. Not the executives who chased stock spikes, but the ones who signed their checks and kept folders labeled liability exposure in locked drawers. It was happening. I could have taken a victory lap, could have gone to the press, could have torched every bridge and danced in the flames. But I didn't, because this wasn't about headlines. This was about balance. And I wasn't done yet. That morning, I pulled the backup drive labeled Alt Archive. It contained system access logs, buried email drafts, draft contracts never finalized but internally reviewed. It also contained something else, a timeline. A timeline that proved Stratwell's executive team had removed 3 critical disclosures between the last internal draft and the one submitted to regulators. I'd flagged them all, and they'd buried them. At 2:44 p.m., I sent a message to my attorney. Not a warning, not a demand, just facts, with supporting documentation and timestamps. He replied within 10 minutes. On record, will hold unless instructed otherwise. Then he added one more line. They're scared. It was the first time anyone had said it out loud. But I already knew. I could feel it in their pacing, in their silence, in the way their legal team kept shifting tone, from confident to confused to apologetic. They'd misjudged the one thing you can't buy, discipline, because I wasn't reacting. I was executing. At 5:09 p.m., Charlotte Hale called again. No assistant. No buffer. She spoke slower this time. Said the board wanted resolution. Said there were mutually beneficial paths forward if I was willing to re-engage under new terms. Her voice didn't crack, but it was close. I told her I'd consider it, but only under one condition. Not money, not position, documentation. I wanted an internal memo signed by Victor Lang, admitting the material omissions, not to the SEC, not to the press, just to the board. She didn't respond right away, but I knew she was listening. The next morning, I'd have what I asked for. And Stratwell? They'd finally realized they hadn't silenced a problem. They'd promoted it. At 8:12 the next morning, it arrived. Encrypted PDF. No subject line. No introduction. Just a file titled internal_memo_final. PDF. I read it once. Then twice. It wasn't everything. Not a full confession. But it was enough. Victor Lang acknowledged, in plain legal phrasing, that certain material risk factors had been temporarily withheld from preliminary filings pending internal evaluation. He claimed it was a judgment call made to streamline early review, but the language was careful, not an outright lie, but not defensible either. Most importantly, it was dated and signed. They didn't think I'd ever see it. But now I had it, and now it was part of my archive. That document changed everything. Not because it gave me leverage, I already had that, but because it confirmed what I needed to know. Victor had acted alone. The board hadn't known, at least not at first, which meant they were salvageable. Victor, though he was finished, I didn't need to push. The damage was already spreading. Stratwell's general counsel was replaced, effective immediately. My attorney received a request for a private mediation session, off record, to clarify misunderstandings. The board wanted this over. Clean, fast, quiet. But that's not how this works. You don't get to fire the guy holding the fuse, then ask him to put the match down. At 3 p.m., I logged into the internal network for the last time. Access they forgot to revoke. I didn't take anything. I didn't plant anything. I just downloaded one last system log, a list of every edit made to the merger documents during my final month on payroll. The entry showed everything, who accessed what, when, and from which device. Victor's name came up 27 times. That wasn't strategy. That was panic. And panic leaves fingerprints. I packaged the logs with the memo. Stored them in the legal vault. Redundant backups. Physical copies. Paper trail secured. Then I drafted my terms. It wasn't about money. I didn't want hush pay. What I wanted was structure, protection, documentation that I was terminated without cause, written retraction of internal claims, a legal acknowledgement of my role as lead risk officer on the deal. They gave me everything, even the title, retroactively restored. Stratwell's leadership tried to bury me in the dark. They forgot one thing. I knew where the light switch was, and I wasn't done yet. Not until the last brick was placed. 3 days later, the settlement was official. They called it a personnel correction in the internal memo. No blame assigned. No names mentioned. But I saw the language. I recognized the shape of retreat disguised as resolution. Victor Lang submitted his resignation the same afternoon, pursuing new opportunities. Standard phrasing. But I knew the truth. He was removed. Quietly. Permanently. Stratwell's board had seen enough. My attorney forwarded me a line from one of their private correspondences. This could have sunk the deal. He saved it. Funny how quickly the story changes when the fire burns close enough. I didn't respond. I didn't attend the mediation. My terms were met. The paper trail was intact. There was nothing left to say. But I wasn't done. Not yet. Because there were others. I'd worked in silence for 11 years. And in that time, I saw patterns. Not just in Stratwell, but in the system. Companies inflating valuations, hiding risk behind legal language, cutting out anyone who got too close to the truth. They always used the same tactics. Isolate the analyst, discredit the report, bury the risk. Wait for the signature, then fire the whistle. That playbook only works if the target plays defense. I didn't. At 10 a.m., I met with a friend, a former compliance officer turned independent investigator. I handed him a flash drive. No threats. No requests. Just data. I'm done with this, I said. But it's still happening. And someone needs to look. He nodded once. Said he'd make sure it reached the right hands. Then I walked out. No headlines. No lawsuits. No press conference. That's not how I win. The merger went through 2 weeks later. Publicly celebrated. Quietly sanitized. I wasn't mentioned in the press release. But I didn't need to be. My signature was on the risk memo. My work was in the foundation. And my silence? It was never about weakness. It was tactical. They tried to erase me. But they ended up legitimizing me. Not just to themselves, but to everyone watching from the shadows, the quiet ones. The analysts, the auditors, the overlooked professionals who've been told to stay in their lane while cleaning up corporate wreckage in the dark. I didn't burn the house down. I rewired it. Now it was time to disappear, not in defeat, but by design. Let the next fire find someone else. I'd already left the map. I didn't tell anyone I was leaving. Not friends. Not former coworkers. Not even the investigator I handed the flash drive to. When the last email was sent, when the last condition was fulfilled, I shut everything down. No announcements. Just a quiet exit. I moved out of my apartment in the city and into a short-term rental 2 states over. Small town. Population under 20,000. No corporate towers, no merger headlines. Just hills, silence, and space. My phone went into a drawer. The kind of drawer that doesn't get reopened. It wasn't fear. It wasn't shame. It was something colder, cleaner. I played the game, seen the rules from the inside, and realized I didn't need the board anymore. Not after what I'd built and what I'd exposed. People like Victor Lang always think they're the system. They forget who builds it, who maintains it, who watches in silence while they make moves they don't understand. By the time they realize their mistake, the damage is already done. The proof is already printed. And the man they tried to silence is already gone, with documentation in every direction and a legacy they didn't see coming. I'd gotten offers. 2 major firms reached out through private intermediaries, both impressed by how I handled the Stratwell situation. They called it a case study in internal escalation. One offered me a directorship in risk analysis. The other, a role in strategy for Fortune 100 clients. I declined both. Not because I couldn't do the work, but because they were calling the wrong version of me. The version they thought was still playing the game. I wasn't. I spent my mornings walking trails with black coffee in a thermos. Afternoons reading case files, sometimes researching, not for work, but to understand. Understand how deep the rot goes in the system we pretend is stable. And every so often, I'd get a message. From someone like me. An analyst. A junior partner. A compliance auditor. They'd found my name buried in the redacted footnotes of a Stratwell shareholder briefing, or traced the risk memo metadata and saw the initials. They always started the same way. I know you don't know me, but I think what you did mattered. And I never replied. Because they weren't really writing to me. They were writing to themselves. To the part of them still holding the line. Still watching the walls. still waiting for the day they'd stop being silent and start becoming strategic, just like I had. A year passed. No headlines. No interviews. No lawsuits. Just silence. Victor Lang's name disappeared from industry circles. Stratwell's merger was finalized under restructured terms, according to an amended SEC filing I found archived on a legal database. No mention of omissions. No public fallout. That was by design, because sometimes real accountability doesn't look like handcuffs or courtrooms. It looks like a man with a reputation now living in shadows. A name once respected, now quietly passed over. And me? I stayed out of sight. Not because I was hiding, but because what I'd built didn't need my presence to stand. I created something durable. A blueprint. Not for revenge, but for resistance. And people were using it. Every few months, another quiet message would appear. Not from lawyers. Not from companies. From people inside. One was a risk officer at a pharmaceutical firm. Another, a compliance lead in private finance. One ran IT for a nonprofit that had been pressured to shift reporting metrics before a funding audit. They'd all seen something. They'd all stayed quiet. Until they didn't. And somehow, they found their way to me. Not for help. For confirmation. That it could be done. That silence isn't surrender, it's strategy. That waiting isn't weakness, it's preparation. They weren't asking how to blow up their companies. They were asking how to protect what mattered, without becoming casualties. And I gave them the only truth that had ever worked for me. Document everything. Say little. Move precisely. Let their mistakes speak louder than your voice. That's what broke Stratwell's defenses. Not noise. Proof. I didn't need revenge. I didn't need recognition. What I needed was to leave something behind stronger than what was there before. And I had. In the quiet hills where I now lived, I sometimes thought about the man I used to be. Always on guard. Always calculating. Always assuming the worst. That man got me here. But he didn't need to run the next chapter. One night, I got a letter in the mail. Handwritten. No return address. Just 3 lines. I followed your lead. They tried to erase me. Now they report to me. I folded it once. Put it in the drawer beside the flash drive I hadn't touched in months. Not because I needed to remember, but because it reminded me of the one truth they never understood. Some men don't fight back with fire. They wait. And when the moment comes, they move without raising their voice. What would you have done in my place? If the story hit you, leave a like. And don't forget to subscribe. It only gets stronger from here.